Imagine looking down at Earth from space. There are no borders, no flags, no politics, just land, rivers, mountains, coastlines, and nearly 8 billion people trying to build better lives for themselves. Now imagine choosing between these two countries. Both have fertile farmlands, both have access to oceans, both have millions of ambitious people, and both are connected to global trade. From a 30,000-foot level, neither appears destined for greatness or failure. Fast forward 50 years, and the difference is staggering. One country is filled with modern skylines, efficient transportation, thriving businesses, and rising incomes. The other struggles with unreliable electricity, crumbling infrastructure, unemployment, and poverty. How can two nations begin with so much potential and end up being two completely different places? More importantly, why does this happen over and over throughout history? Because this isn't just one story. It's about one of the oldest mysteries in economics. Why do nations become wealthy while others remain poor? Most people already have an answer to this question at this point in this video. Some will say it's natural resources, others will blame geography, while some will say it was colonialism, and others may argue corruption. Each explanation sounds convincing, and each contains parts of the truth, but none of them fully explain why prosperity seems almost inevitable in some places and elusive in others. To answer that question, we first have to challenge something almost everyone assumes. If you wanted to predict which country would become rich, where would you start? Most people would probably look at the natural resources, maybe the oil, the gold, diamonds, and maybe even the copper. After all, these resources generate billions of dollars. Countries compete over them. Wars have been fought over them. Surely nations blessed with abundant natural wealth should have some kind of enormous advantage. It seems obvious until history refuses to cooperate. Japan imports most of the raw materials that powers its economy, and Singapore has almost no natural resources at all. Switzerland doesn't sit atop massive oil fields or mineral deposits, and South Korea emerged from war with widespread poverty and very little to work with. Yet each became one of the most prosperous economies in our world today. Now compare that with countries that possess extraordinary natural wealth, yet continue struggling to create lasting prosperity for much of their population. Suddenly, the equation stops making sense. Resources clearly matter, but they cannot be the entire story. If they were, Japan should be poor, and many resource-rich nations should be among the wealthiest on Earth. Instead, history gives us something a little bit different. So perhaps we've been asking the wrong questions. Maybe prosperity isn't about what a country has. Maybe it's about what a country does with what it has. But if resources aren't enough, what is? To answer that, we need to examine another explanation that has shaped global history for centuries. Because if resources don't determine a nation's future, perhaps its past does. This explanation feels almost impossible to argue against. After all, history shapes everything. Wars redraw borders, empires rise and fall, and colonial powers have extracted resources, built infrastructures to serve their own interests, and often left governments behind that were never designed to create broad prosperity. Those decisions still echo today in some parts of the world. To pretend otherwise would ignore centuries of history. But here's the problem. History explains where countries begin. It doesn't always explain where they end up. Consider Singapore. When they gained independence in 1965, it wasn't viewed as an economic miracle waiting to happen. It had few natural resources, high unemployment, serious housing shortages, ethnic tensions, and even its own leaders questioned whether the country could survive as an independent nation. Today, Singapore has one of the highest GDP per capita in the world and consistently ranks among the easiest places to start a business on Earth. Something changed. History mattered, but history wasn't destiny. South Korea tells a very similar story. When the Korean War ended in 1953, much of the country has been devastated. Few observers would have predicted that within a generation, South Korea would become home to companies like Samsung and Hyundai. Now compare those stories with countries that share similar colonial experiences, but produce very little outcomes. Some developed stable governments, others experienced repeated political instability, and some attracted investment. Others struggle to keep businesses from leaving. The more examples you see, the harder it becomes to believe that history alone determines a country's future. So if resources aren't enough, and history isn't enough, perhaps the missing ingredient is money. For decades, that became the next great idea. If poor countries simply lack capital, why not provide it? The logic sounded almost impossible to ignore. Let's invest more money, build more, spend more. Surely prosperity would follow. But once again, history doesn't show that. Over the past 70 years, the world has spent trillions of dollars trying to reduce poverty. Some of those investments transformed lives, others disappeared with surprisingly little to show for it. The logic seems almost impossible to argue against. Build schools, expand healthcare, construct roads, finance agriculture, support entrepreneurs, and improve education. And to be clear, many of these investments have saved lives. Millions of children have gained access to vaccines, and communities have received clean drinking water. Infrastructure has improved. Development aid has accomplished many important things. I've personally seen this while on the continent of Africa and while in the Philippines, but something unexpected happened. While some countries use outside investors to strengthen their economies, others remain trapped in cycles of dependence. Money arrived, projects were completed, yet broad self-sustaining prosperity often failed to follow. Imagine giving two people the exact same amount of money to start a business. One lives in a place where contracts are enforced, banks are trustworthy, property is protected, permits are predictable. Investors feel confident. The other faces constant uncertainty, rules change without warning, businesses require political connections to survive, success attracts corruption instead of opportunity. Both people receive the same money, but they are not operating under the same rules. One investment multiplies, the other struggles just to survive. The difference wasn't the amount of capital, it was the environment surrounding it. Economists have observed this pattern for decades. Capital tends to flow toward places where people believe tomorrow will be predictable. Businesses invest where contracts are honored. Entrepreneurs take risks when they believe success will belong to them. And investors build factories they trust the rules wouldn't suddenly change. Without that confidence, even large amounts of money struggle to create lasting growth. This also changes the way we think about corruption. Corruption is often described as the reason countries remain poor, and certainly corruption can slow economic growth. But here's the deeper question. Where does corruption actually come from? Why does it become routine in some places, while remaining relatively limited in others? Because corruption isn't simply about dishonest people. Every country has dishonest people. The real question is whether the system rewards honesty or rewards exploiting the system itself. That's a very different problem. At this point, a pattern begins to emerge. Resources weren't enough, history wasn't enough, money wasn't enough. Each mattered, but none explained why millions of ordinary people choose to invest, build businesses, hire workers, or take risks that create long-term prosperity. So perhaps we've been searching in the wrong place entirely. Maybe the real answer isn't found in what a country possesses or even what they receive. Maybe it's hidden inside the rules that shape everyday decisions. Those rules are rarely discussed on the evening news. They're invisible. People never think about them, yet they quietly influence almost every economic decision society makes. And once you understand those rules, the difference between wealthy nations and poor nations begin to make a lot more sense. After ruling out resources, history, and money alone, a different pattern emerges. The countries that consistently escape poverty didn't necessarily possess more advantages. They built systems, not perfect systems, just better ones. Imagine you've spent 10 years building a successful business, you hire employees, expand into new markets, save profits to invest in for new equipment. Then one morning, the government seizes your entire company, or a politically connected competitor convinces the court to take it away. Would you start another business? Most people wouldn't. And can you blame them? Not because they suddenly became less ambitious, because the system changed the incentives. Now imagine a different country. You know the contracts are being enforced. You know your property is protected. You know taxes may change, but not overnight. You know investors are treated fairly. Banks lend based on business plans and not political relationships. You still face risk. Every entrepreneur does. But they're business risk, not political risk. The difference changes everything. This is what economists mean when they talk about institutions. The word sounds technical, but the idea is surprisingly simple. Institutions are the rules of the game. Some are written into law, while others exist through culture and long-standing norms. Together, they shape millions of decisions every single day. Will someone start a business? Will a farmer invest in better equipment? Will a bank approve a loan? Will an investor build a factory? Will a talented entrepreneur stay, or will he actually leave the country? These decisions rarely make headlines, but over decades, they determine whether the economy grows or stalls. Think about it this way. Governments don't create wealth. people do, workers do, entrepreneurs do, inventors do, farmers do, and investors. The role of a country's system is not to create prosperity directly. It's to create an environment where millions of ordinary people feel confident enough to create prosperity themselves. That's an important distinction, because once people believe their effort will be rewarded, they work differently, they save differently, they invest differently, businesses expand, capital stays, innovation accelerates, and over time, those millions of individual choices compound into something much larger. Not overnight, not in one election cycle, but over generations. This also explains why two countries can receive the same amount of investments, yet produce completely different outcomes. Money can build a road, but only a healthy system encourages businesses to use that road to build an economy. Money can build a school, but only a healthy system creates opportunities that persuade educated graduates to stay and build their future at home. Money can build a port, but only a healthy system attracts companies willing to invest around for decades. Infrastructure matters, investment matters, education matters, but none of them reaches its full potential without the invisible rules that encourage people to take productive risk. At the beginning of this video, we imagined two different countries from a distance. They look remarkably similar. Both had people, potential, resources, and opportunity. Yet decades later, their futures couldn't look more different. The easy answer is to assume one country simply had better luck. History tells a different story. Prosperity rarely comes from a single discovery, not oil, not gold, not foreign aid, not even one great leader. It grows slowly through systems that encourage trust, reward innovation, protect investments, and allow ordinary people to plan not just for tomorrow, but for the next generation. That's why nations stay poor, and it's also how nations become rich. Because in the end, the greatest natural resource any country can possess is a system that allows its people to reach their full potential. Until next time.